I recently approached my wife with a pretty serious question, one that could change the way our family unit looks. Yeah, that serious of a question. And to be honest, I was really nervous with how it was going to turn out. Okay, I'll do my best, buddy. I know. You need another friend. Hey, hon. Hey, I got a question for you. What do you think about getting another Doberman? Okay. Well, this was quite a conversation between my wife and I that went on for a little while, but I know a lot of you guys out there will find yourselves in a similar situation with your significant other, especially those of you who love this breed like I do. So that's why today we're running through the pros and the cons of adding a second Doberman to your family. And we're gonna also talk about some really common pitfalls that people fall into while attempting this. And at the very end, I'm gonna tell you how this conversation went and if you're going to be seeing a second Doberman here at Doberman Planet. So let's jump straight into it. So let's start off with the pros of adding a second Doberman to your house. Now, first up, it's easier to meet their exercise requirements. These dogs have huge exercise requirements, and having two of these high energy dogs, they can feed off each other and really wear each other down throughout the day. And it can really help with kind of those witching hours. And a lot of you out there with Dobermans know what I mean. Just after breakfast or between about 7 p.m. to 9 p.m. at night when your dog's just doing donuts in your house, it can really help calm them down if they've had a lot of exercise with a companion dog of theirs throughout the day. Next up is they'll have more mental stimulation throughout the day. These dogs are incredibly smart, and if you got two smart dogs, they can interact with each other, really wear each other out on a mental level, which helps a lot with many things. They're just more relaxed throughout the day, and it can also help significantly with separation anxiety if you're having that issue. But be careful though, if your dog really severely suffers from a really bad case of separation anxiety, at times it can actually transfer over to the second dog, and then you can have double the issue. But in general, it does help stimulate them more mentally. Next pro is there's an increased likelihood that they'll protect you if need be. Dogs are pack animals and they thrive off that pack environment, and Dobermans are no different. In fact, it can really help boost your dog's confidence and assertiveness levels if they have a companion there with them. And if you want your dog to step up to the plate and protect you if need be, you want to make sure your Doberman has plenty of both of those things. So if an intruder breaks in, not only will they have two Dobermans to contend with, but they're going to have two Dobermans with an extra little boost of confidence and assertiveness, which is good for you, bad for the intruder. Next up, the early trainings can be a lot easier for the second Doberman in the house, especially if there's a good age difference between them. If your first dog's a little bit older, really well dialed in with their behavior and training, it can help make a lot of the puppy stages a lot easier for the second dog. They're very good at regulating each other, and especially the older dogs to the younger ones, and the younger ones naturally would emulate the behavior of the older dogs, so it can make things like potty training easier. Getting through those puppy biting and nipping stages, those can be shortened. It just makes a lot of those far easier for the second puppy because they'll naturally be emulating the behavior of the older dog in the house. Next up, there's less trauma when one passes away. And I'm gonna say maybe for this one because it's always gonna be hard and traumatic no matter what. I remember my last Doberman, Cooper, passed away. One of the hardest things was just the constant quietness in the house and the stillness in the house. And a lot of times, if you just have a second dog there, it can really help with that and help you get through those tough stages. But keep in mind too that dogs grieve as well, and your first dog's certainly going to be grieving for the other one, and it's important to keep that in mind, but this is one potential benefit. And next up, there's just more Doberman to love when you got two of them in the house. Now, who doesn't want more of that? It's pretty self-explanatory, this one, but you know how you're never alone when you have a Doberman? Well, if you got two of them, you're certainly never alone, and who doesn't want two Dobermans cuddling up with them on the bed or relaxing with them on the couch while they're watching a movie? I know that sounds awesome to me. Now, it sounds pretty fantastic, right? It sounds like we're all pretty sold on getting a second Doberman. But you know what? Hold the phone because there are some very serious downsides to getting a second Doberman as well. But before we jump straight into that, I do want to take a second to ask you to please hit that subscribe button down below while you're here and the little bell icon next to it if you haven't already. If that button is red, please click it. It really helps support us and it makes sure that you and I get to continue hanging out in the future. All right, let's jump straight into the cons of getting a second Doberman. First up is increased costs, and specifically increased food costs, toy costs, and equipment costs. Now, Food, you're going to have double the food, so that's definitely going to be an increase. Toys, you're going to probably have to have double the toys or close to it, which is definitely going to be an increase as well. And equipment, now you could probably reuse a lot of the puppy stuff from your first dog if your first dog's out of puppyhood. But in general, you're going to have to buy a lot of the same equipment over again. They're going to need their own beds and a few other things. So that can definitely be a downside for sure. Next up, conflicts can take place in the house. Now, this is definitely a downside of having two Dobermans living together, especially if they're of the same sex, because these will tend to be more often. But even if they're of the opposite sex, they can still happen. And make sure you have a way to safely separate the two dogs if something happens. And you're always going to have to probably feed the dogs separately, because food is one of the biggest triggers of aggression between two dogs living in the same house. So this can definitely be a downside as well. Next up, you're going to definitely have to be dividing your attention if you have a second Doberman in the house. Things like walking your dog is going to be harder, training them, socializing them. A lot of these things you can do together, but many, especially early on, you're going to have to do separately for the best results, such as leash training, for example. You're going to want to make sure your dog has the basics of it before you start trying to walk with two dogs. So that's going to have to be done separately. Socializing, that is very often best done separately early on, so they're not relying on the other dog as a crutch for their socialization. Training them is going to have to be done separately to increase their focus and decrease the distractions from you. So all these things are going to take added attention and focus from you. And also, you're not going to be able to hover as well over the new dog that you're training, because you have your attention divided. So this could lead to you slipping up a few times with your guidance on the dog and being a little less consistent. And if you're less consistent, that tends to hamper the training of a dog. Another downside is going on trips is certainly a lot harder. It's much easier to find a friend or family member to take your one well-behaved Doberman for you while you're out on vacation, and it's definitely difficult if you have two of these dogs. You're certainly asking a lot more of your friends or family, and the chances increase that instead you may be looking for a boarding kennel to put your dog in, which certainly isn't ideal. And then speaking of boarding kennels, if you do have to do that, you're looking at double the cost there as well. Another downside, there's definitely more hair in the house and mess generally just to clean up. Now, Dobermans are certainly low shedding dogs in general, and they tend to be on the clean side, but whatever mess they do make, and just like any dog, they do make a mess from time to time, it's gonna be doubled for you. You're gonna be sweeping up your floor twice as often or vacuuming twice as often, and you're gonna have twice as much hair floating around as well. So this is certainly another downside. Now, those are the pros and the cons of getting a second Doberman, but let's talk real quick about some common traps or pitfalls that people very often fall into while doing this. Now, the first one is getting two Dobermans of the same sex. I'm not saying this isn't possible. I'm just saying it can be more difficult and certainly more risky. You know, it's always thought kind of in the Doberman world that male on male aggression was a big problem. They would get in fights more often, but in general, they tend to be less serious of conflicts. Whereas female on female aggression is now kind of starting to show that it's a thing, and it's a serious thing to be taken seriously in recent data. And it's always kind of been thought that in the Doberman world, females, when they fight less often, but they tend to be more serious conflicts with a higher chance of injury. In fact, there was a study done in '96, the source will be down in the description below, that showed that female dogs were most likely to initiate conflicts in a household, which of course has zero correlation to the human world in my house anyway. There was actually a more recent study done in March of 2011, and that one showed that of conflicts that take place between dogs living in the same household, 79% of those conflicts occurred between dogs of the same sex. And actually, 47% of the conflicts were female on female dogs, and 32% were male on male. So certainly, getting two dogs of the same sex in the same household can be a risky choice to make. Now, the next common pitfall that people fall into is getting two Dobermans of the same age or even from the same litter. Now, this is kind of the same as getting dogs of the same sex. It's doable, it's just certainly a lot more risky and a lot more difficult. For one, you definitely run the risk of the dog developing, or both dogs developing, something called littermate syndrome, which is something where the dogs bond tighter to each other, even if they're not from the same litter, if they're just the same age, but they'll bond tighter to each other than the owners, and it can lead to a long list of behavior problems, such as severe fear of new people, places, or sounds, inability to eat when they're not with their other dog, lack of confidence, and inability to train them, the trainability issues. There's a whole long list of behavior problems that can come along with littermate syndrome. Also, you're gonna have to go through all these stages at the same time ×2, splitting your attention is going to be incredibly difficult. Things like walking the dog should be done separately when they're really young, to really teach them the basics of it and not together. That way you can focus on each dog. So you're going to have to be doing it separately with each dog. Also, socializing them a lot of times should be done separately, especially during that critical socialization window, which you'll be experiencing at the same time with the two dogs. So for example, going to the dog park, you'll pretty much need to go do that separately for a little while to make sure that they don't rely on each other for their confidence, because a lot of conflicts at the dog park take place from two dogs at the same household because they start to rely on each other for that confidence. It boosts their confidence way high, and then they tend to start bullying other dogs. And they can even have severe separation anxiety when they don't have their litter mate or their other companion there with them. So it just makes everything a lot more difficult when you have two dogs from the same litter or the same age. So if you're gonna do this, what's the ideal way of doing this? Well, in my opinion, the best way is to not consider a second Doberman until your first one is at least 2 years of age or older and is fully trusted and just really well just dialed in. That way, when you get your new puppy and they're emulating the behavior of the older dog, that older dog can actually help you get through some of those tough puppy stages a whole lot easier, including the biting and nipping stages, the potty training, the behavior, housebreaking stuff. They can help you get through all that a lot easier. And I'd really urge you to consider your second Doberman as being the opposite sex of your first one, just to minimize issues. So if your current Doberman is 2 years of age or older, really well socialized and well dialed in and fully trusted, and you're going to get a second Doberman of the opposite sex, and you're willing to put in the work and the effort that it takes to do this, then I would say you pretty much have as many cards as possible stacked in your favor. So how did it all work out with me after this discussion with my wife? Well, we eventually decided not to get another Doberman. You know, I'm working full time, we're juggling 3 kids, so our attention will definitely be divided quite a bit. And we just got through the puppy stages with Arlo here, and it's just not a good time. You know, the wife made some points that I definitely agree with, and it was definitely a mutual decision. Definitely.
Wife blocked.
Yeah, well, guys, I may not be getting a second Doberman right now, but you know what? If you love this breed as much as I do, definitely make sure you're subscribed down below, and I'll certainly always have resources helpful for us Doberman owners listed in the description of all my videos, so take a look at that before you go anywhere. Thank you so much for watching, guys. Keep being great Doberman breed ambassadors, and of course, see you next time.